Hello there, and welcome to the 189th edition of DF Direct Weekly, which is and shall always remain our weekly discussion show concentrating on the latest gaming and technology news. Man, it's been a busy few weeks, but we're still here, we're still directing. Joining me first of all, John Linneman. Hello.
Guten Morgen, Rich. How are you?
I'm great, particularly as the director always goes out in the afternoon.
Oh, well,
Yeah. Also joining us, possibly the busiest man in the games industry, Oliver Mackenzie.
Yes, back from a long, hard, grueling shift in the PlayStation 5 Pro mines, Rich. Here to chat about some hopefully mostly unrelated topics today.
Mostly.
Yes, well, we are going to be talking about PlayStation 5 Pro, but actually in a standalone video. We've had a number of people asking about image quality in certain Pro titles, Silent Hill 2 being the big one, I guess. Oh, yeah. Star Wars Outlaws, a whole bunch of games where there do seem to be issues related to PSSR. I think the most interesting thing is like Silent Hill 2, where people are basically suggesting there isn't a Pro patch because it looks so bad. But I think at this point, we've pretty much come to the realization that this is the Pro patch and it needs addressing. But this is a completely separate topic that we're going to be addressing in a separate video. But PSSR does seem to be a bit of a double-edged sword at the moment, where some games, you're looking at Stellar Blade at the moment, John, just look absolutely incredible. And then we've got games, it seems to be typically a combination of lower resolutions and certain ray tracing effects that really have got issues. And we'll be talking about that in separate content. But the reason I bring that up now is that we were talking about supporter Q&A questions, and literally so many of them is like, Game X, what's happening on PlayStation 5 Pro? It's looking a bit odd. Rest assured, we will get around to that, but we've got Alan Wake 2 content out at the moment that should address some of those issues, but there's more to come. But first of all, let's move on to predictably, the first news topic. Digital Foundry is proudly sponsored by MSI's range of next-generation QD OLED monitors, available in 32-inch and 27-inch 16:9 configurations, along with 32:9 49-inch and 21:9 34-inch ultra-wide models. These are some of the best monitors we've ever tested, with incredible motion clarity, OLED burn-in protection, AI features, and genuinely game-changing performance. Check the video description to learn more, and for UK viewers, the chance to save big on MSI QD OLED displays, including £300 off 34-inch and 49-inch ultra-wides. Okay, so a big week for Microsoft. Phil Spencer has done a couple of interviews, the big one being with Bloomberg, where a whole manner of topics have come to the fore. I think the big one, well, there's talk about the Xbox handheld, which is all but confirmed now, but seemingly several years away, which is something we didn't expect. But there's also the concept of quote unquote no red lines on which Xbox games are going to be moving out to other platforms. And at the same time, there's been a new marketing campaign. I'd say this marketing campaign makes a lot of sense to people outside of the core console industry, but probably riles up people who are invested in the Xbox ecosystem. This idea that this is an Xbox, and it basically brings up a whole bunch of devices that historically have not been Xboxes. So, basically the transitionary period from Microsoft and Xbox is proceeding apace. And John, I'm going to come to you first. What do you make of all of this?
Well, first, Rich, this is not an Xbox currently. I'm holding up a Steam Deck, but it could become one if you install the right software.
Right.
What do I make of this? Well, I feel like to really look at all of this, we need to kind of just talk about Xbox of 2024 in general. And if you look at the last 12 months, how much they've pivoted, but how it's kind of all rolled out somewhat slowly, right? Like, it's clear that they're trying to shift the entire business into a new direction. I mean, and this new ad campaign is sort of like the cherry on that, where it's like, oh yeah, this is clearly the idea is, Xbox is now a platform for games as opposed to a specific piece of hardware. But if you go back to 2023, November, I don't think this line of thinking really existed in the public yet. I don't think people were thinking like, oh yeah, like Xbox is becoming this thing. And what a difficult journey this must have been for them. Like for whatever the reasons are for going down this path, to go from being like a specific piece of hardware, a company that's holding like these fan fests specifically around it. You've got like dedicated fan bases just like loving your specific thing, but because of market conditions for multiple reasons, you've had to change. They've had to figure out a way to essentially slowly rip off that Band-Aid and like say, hey, we're transforming the business into something different. Right. And you can feel it. Like the response from the community has been, it feels like it was strong at first, but it's increasingly kind of died off. And I think people are slowly just kind of accepting now that this is what Microsoft has opted to turn the Xbox business into.
Right.
So that's interesting. And the fact that they say no red lines on exclusives also kind of goes against, I don't know if it goes against, but you remember earlier this year, right? The whole thing kicked off with the rumors about those 4 games coming to other platforms, right? Like Sea of Thieves and Hi-Fi Rush and whatnot. And Phil was like, oh, we're only talking about these 4 games. We're not talking about like Starfield or Indiana. I can't remember. Was it Indiana Jones? I can't remember which names he specifically dropped, but it was like, we're not talking about those yet. But now we know Indiana Jones is coming to PlayStation. And now like we very clearly say, hey, there's no red lines anymore. That starts to mean like, okay, anything is good to go. Are we going to see Halo on the PlayStation? It's starting to feel like yes.
Well, we do have a comment there. I mean, I'm looking at the Bloomberg interview now, and the exact quote, and I think it is worth getting the exact quote.
Let's get the exact quote. You're right. Read it, Rich.
I do not see sort of red lines in our portfolio that says "thou must not." That's literally the quote. I mean, the issue with this Bloomberg interview is that it's kind of cherry-picked quotes and then summaries of what he said. And after that, the Bloomberg article reads, it's too early to make any sort of decision on the next version of Halo. From my perspective, though, if you're putting out a campaign that says this is an Xbox, this is an Xbox, this is an Xbox, when it's basically a move of the platform to any kind of gaming device that can host those games, then basically that kind of says to me the decision has been made, not just on Halo, but on every game.
On every game.
Because, let's say, I've got, one of those devices that's only going to get Indiana Jones, 6 months or 3 months later, rather. There would be consumer confusion. It's like, well, you guys said I've got an Xbox because, this piece of hardware can run it. Why do I have to wait 3 months to play the game that you said I could play? Is it an Xbox or isn't it?
Well, Rich.
So I think, go on.
I think that's actually a very important point. And a part of the discussion is, what does that really mean? Does it mean this is a piece of hardware that can run Xbox games, or is this a piece of hardware that has Game Pass? That's different.
Xbox isn't just Game Pass, though. That's the
I
thing.
agree, but like, what are they trying to pick here in terms of saying like this is an Xbox and this is not, right? Like that's kind of the thing I've been going back and forth on. When you look at the specific pieces of hardware that they show, well, I guess then again they did show the Oculus or the Meta Quest 3 as part of that campaign, right? So maybe then it is not that, like, because a lot of people were like, hey, it's Game Pass. That's what Xbox is now. But if you count like the Quest 3 and if you throw in the PS5, then maybe it is more expensive. And then we get back to your point there, Rich, about the people having to wait 3 months. Is it an Xbox or isn't it?
Well, it's an Xbox on some sort of time delay system. It doesn't quite make sense to me. You're either all in or you're not all in, and basically the direction of travel suggests that they're all in, and it's just basically a matter of time. And if that's the way forward, that's fine. I can see that a lot of people would be quite upset by this campaign, though. The people who've been invested in the ecosystem for many years, possibly decades. The console was always the center of the ecosystem. It was always the focus, but suddenly it's not the focus anymore. And this kind of makes sense if you're looking at things from a kind of, meta view. There's an increasing amount of research that younger users, gaming on mobile phones. And then, the enthusiasts there are moving to gaming laptops or desktops, PC, in other words. PC is an Xbox, I guess, because, it's day and date on all first-party games, right?
Mhm.
So that kind of makes sense. But that's, consoles, it doesn't seem to be a priority for a different generation of gamers. And I think it's kind of weird that the console generation, the console audience is getting progressively older and the PC audience seems to be opening up and getting wider. I think this is why we're seeing this kind of strategy. Oliver, what do you think about all of this? I think what we're looking at is like a further step along in sort of the transition here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with the underlying strategy of targeting streaming PCs, PS5s, mobile devices. I think it makes sense from Microsoft's perspective. It's kind of a natural extension of Microsoft's business in the sense that they're kind of like everywhere all at once with their services, with their platforms. That's kind of been the push from Satya Nadella. But I think part of the problem here for Microsoft that I kind of am trying to figure out exactly how they differentiate themselves here is that Sony has been able to replicate it to a substantial degree without seemingly a ton of difficulty on the platform side. Like their streaming platform is better than Microsoft streaming from what I understand. They have a good subscription game outlet there. And if they wanted to do day and date releases, they could feasibly if that's something that they wanted to accomplish there. And then they have all these exclusive titles, which Microsoft has still had a little bit of difficulty reaching that level of quality and consistency in their first party output. So I kind of have a bit of a question there in terms of how Microsoft moves forward and differentiates themselves. One obvious answer would be PC, but actually harnessing PC in a way that it's adaptable to multiple form factors and works for people, I think is tough. And then you have SteamOS there. You have other competitors that might be coming in. And I think that makes things more difficult. In terms of exclusives, I think the writing has been on the wall basically since Microsoft's initial rumors back in January, February of this year that their titles would be coming to PlayStation. I assumed from that point onwards, basically everything would be coming, because if a title like Sea of Thieves is successful on PlayStation, why wouldn't a title like Microsoft Flight Simulator or Avowed or Halo or whatever, right? It seems like a natural extension of that business. In terms of that whole ad campaign, I do find it funny. It's kind of a reflection of where Microsoft is at the moment with respect to their console business. I'm sort of surprised that they didn't have, presumably Sony would get upset, but why they didn't have a PlayStation on that ad as well, saying this is an Xbox, because perhaps that'll be the future at some point soon with day and date releases on PlayStation there. Ultimately, I guess I don't have a problem with it personally. Obviously, I like consoles. I like PC. I don't like streaming as much. I'm fine with streaming if the quality is good, like home streaming through Moonlight. That's great. GeForce Now is quite good as well. I'm fine with that. I think xCloud needs to get better if Microsoft really wants to push this and have this be like a really viable gaming push especially for the more hardcore gamers. But yeah, ultimately, I guess this is where things are going. And I think from Microsoft's perspective, it makes a lot of sense not to be too invested in a hardware platform that's not very successful. But I guess we're just going to have to see how well that actually works out in practice, because I think Microsoft's answers to these questions of like how you play games across platforms, they're not too great at the moment, in my opinion, but we'll have to see how that progresses.
The cloud thing is interesting because Microsoft, I suspect that they're seeing some pretty decent growth on cloud at the moment. They're making a lot of moves there. In terms of the PlayStation alternative, they've got a 4K streaming platform, but it's only on PlayStation. You actually have to have a PlayStation to stream, which doesn't really make sense. Latency on Xbox is better than PlayStation. I think that's pretty crucial. The issue that I have with xCloud, and I think we've said it in the past, is just that the visual quality just isn't good enough. That's the problem that I have with it. Is it a bandwidth problem? Is it an encoder issue? But when I'm looking at the startup screen, the menu screen for Starfield, and that graduated tint in the background is artifacting. That's just on a static screen. That's problematic. And yeah, basically quality just needs to improve across the board there for it to become viable. Personally, if you want to get into, I mean, I know this is not the audience, but if you want to get into Xbox cheaply, get a secondhand Series S. That's so cheap, and you get so much for that money. That's just what I'd say about that. Any additional thoughts? I mean, obviously, on this interview we had kind of like confirmation that we've got a handheld coming, but the expectation has been that Phil has been trailing it for so long that it might be happening quite soon. But instead, he's saying it's a few years out, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Oliver?
Yeah, I am actually really surprised it's going to take them that long, apparently, to get a product to market. Because if you wanted to just slap Windows on some well-designed handheld PC hardware with a commodity SoC like Phoenix or whatever, right? It might be at that point. That seems like a shorter-term project, especially if you might imagine work would maybe start in 2022 on that after the success of the Steam Deck, possibly. Revealed that there is a strong market for those kinds of devices and spurred other manufacturers to get into that business. To me, 26 or maybe 27 or whatever that might be suggests a device with a larger scope, like maybe custom SoC, maybe more heavily adapted Windows, maybe something more Xbox focused, something that ties into a next gen console. I think it is a more ambitious project. I'd have to assume if it does end up launching it is basically just another Windows device that is commodity hardware and no special adaptations or anything like that. I think that's going to be a bit of a disappointment. But like right now, I mean, if you look at something like the ROG Ally and you get rid of Windows and you put Bazzite on it.
Well, that's the key thing.
Yeah,
right.
Get rid of Windows.
Yeah, that's a pretty, the hardware is pretty good. Could it be better? Could it be more comfortable? Absolutely. Could the display be OLED instead of LCD? Absolutely. There's some things you could look at that. Could the performance be better? I'm sure it could be with the next generation SoC. But like, that's a pretty good product right now. And the operating system is really the thing that's holding them back. So I kind of wonder if maybe that's the area of some concern. Because otherwise, if I'm Microsoft, I'm thinking, let's launch a device a little bit sooner. We can probably get it out the door and have it be a good quality device, and then iterate on that device into the next 2 years. That's what I would think about. But I have to assume that some of the holdup there is on the operating system side of things, or maybe on the platform side of things with integration with the next Xbox. That's what I would assume, at least. So hopefully they do something ambitious there that's interesting and does justify that wait.
Okay, but Oliver, let me put this to you. What if, in terms of that first device, it's already out there and it's called the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go, and it is basically, first of all, to sort out the software problem, because that seems to be the gist that I'm getting from the interview, where they're saying the Xbox app is good, but it could be better. That does suggest there's going to be some movement on the software side of things. I don't think that's movement enough if it's just the Xbox app, because there's fundamental issues with Windows as a whole. Windows kind of needs to be stripped down and rebuilt almost to eliminate some of the many problems that we've seen with it. And it is kind of weird, especially in light of the Bazzite work that you did on the ROG Ally, which basically shows that with Linux, there's a good-to-go system, basically.
Yeah.
And Microsoft is so behind.
To me, just improving the Xbox app, that's like a tiny fraction of their problems. To make Windows work for gaming handhelds, I think there are a lot of things. I think the number one thing they need to do is to build an interface that basically works as an end-to-end solution without ever needing to dip into a desktop interface. I think that's critical. That's something that SteamOS does quite well. They also need to smooth out driver annoyances, like updating your drivers across the stack. On Bazzite and SteamOS, you click an update button and you get all the updates delivered to you immediately with a very short and brief update process. And that is a very good experience there. You also need to sort out shader compilation problems. On SteamOS, Valve has Fossilize, which essentially solves that issue quite well. And you need to sort out other kind of Xbox and Windows Game Pass issues, like login problems and issues with the Xbox app that are kind of long-standing and do need some sorting out. So I think that Windows does need to improve in a lot of areas. To me, it is not an Xbox app problem. It is a whole operating system and even approach towards some issues like shader compilation and things like this that need to improve across the entire operating system. And so, yeah, it is a really big effort, and I hope they have a much more comprehensive plan of action there.
Yep. John, I mean, I gave you a Windows handheld, and there's no denying the power there versus Steam Deck. But the actual day-to-day operation of the device, it's just off-putting, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also interested to try Bazite on that thing because I think that could really bring it to life. I think everything you were saying, Oliver, holds true, but I feel like I feel like the base here is more like take the Xbox interface experience from the current Xbox consoles and essentially have a separate mode of operation for Windows, similar to SteamOS, right? How you boot into the game mode versus the desktop mode. And I feel like the game mode needs to be its own separate thing and not just an app that you launch within Windows. Because having to boot to a Windows desktop at all for a gaming experience is not good. It's not an experience that really works all that well. But so essentially I feel like that's the point, is like they need to take that Xbox experience and work more features into it to allow it to function more on computer-like devices, right? Allow more access to Windows-like features comfortably from within that Xbox interface. And like you say, they need to sort the shader compilation stuff, and they absolutely need to sort the driver update stuff. Because you're right. I mean, it's easier on something like a Steam Deck, right? Where it's fixed hardware, but with Bazite and everything as well, it's quite good. But obviously the big problem with PC is that there's also there's just so much hardware variations that can exist. So how do they make this work? And is this something that would be limited to just specific pieces of hardware and partner hardware? Is this something they could allow for all potential Windows users? Because if they do this, I think a lot of Windows customers are going to be like, oh, I want that, right? I build my own PC. I'd love to use that interface as well. But that becomes harder to support with a wide range of specifications out there. Like even right now, when you look at something like Bazite, like it's designed for. I mean, it's really not meant to be used like on a normal gaming PC, right?
You can use it on a gaming PC.
You can, but
you can. The experience of installing it and getting it running and everything like that, it really is designed for, as far as I can tell, the most popular Windows gaming handhelds. In particular, the ROG Ally seems to have the smoothest go of it as the most popular Windows gaming handheld, as far as I'm aware at the moment. But you can install it on everything. I'd love to try it on a PC at some point. I'm not sure that it would be as smooth as an experience.
No, exactly. And that's the thing, is Microsoft's gonna, not only are they not as smooth as those current solutions in certain areas, they need to get smoother across a wide range of hardware if they decide to go this fully open. But it could also be like, hey, devices that are now called Xbox or specific pieces of hardware from different partners. Microsoft themselves can have their own hardware still if they wanted, and it all runs this like sort of like unified version of Windows where it's like you have this Xbox like interface experience as like the central pillar from which everything runs, with an optional desktop, which would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The final part of the interview I'd like to address is this quote from almost near the end, actually. This quote says, the Xbox business has never been more healthy. And again, it's been paraphrased here. I'm just going to read the paragraph. The Xbox business has never been more healthy, he said, citing growth in cloud and PC gaming as well as console usage. I'd love to have known what is being cited there. The business is performing right now, and I think that means a more healthy future for hardware and the games we build. So, that's interesting, right? Because there's this perception that Microsoft is floundering, but I'm willing to bet that everything that's being said there is absolutely correct. And on this sort of meta scale that involves PC and possibly cloud as well. I mean, we just got no visibility on metrics there. And the fact that they've just launched Black Ops 6, which seems to be doing extremely well. Probably Xbox as a business is in better shape than it's ever been before. It's just this kind of perception of what's happening in the console side of things, which is the area of focus for much of the community that's kind of painting a very different picture. That's quite interesting. But we have gone in terms of messaging when those 4 games were announced, and Phil was talking about the 4 games as an experiment. obviously the leaks were saying something quite different, and now the leaks are sort of coming to pass. So it does suggest that there's this kind of like phased messaging that does eventually end up in Microsoft going fully multi-platform. And I don't really see a problem with that, because if the sort of standard business model for consoles doesn't work for them, then, where do you go next? You've got to try something new. And if you want a console and you want a console ecosystem, there's alternatives to that if you want that, and you'll be able to play Xbox games on those as well. So it's just kind of like an interesting evolution for Microsoft here, and I think just by virtue of their acquisitions, they've already become a multi-platform publisher, and it's just the way it is, and it's the future.
You saw what happened with Black Ops 6, of course. It's like there were people infighting, like, oh, it sold so many copies on PS5, amazing, but then, oh yeah, but it's got all these users on Game Pass, and it's like everybody's arguing, but who wins in that scenario? They're selling tons of units on PS5, but they also got tons of people playing on Game Pass. It's a
disaster, John, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So, I think they're doing all right.
Yeah.
Any final words there, Oliver?
My only worry here is I don't want the fundamental user experience to slip. And like, to me, at least, cloud streaming through xCloud is a bit of a slip in terms of the user experience overall. PC gaming in general, with the UI that's offered there, in a lot of contexts, is a slip in terms of the user experience as well. When you look at what Xbox has delivered historically and this generation, that is to me at least, a pretty good experience and pretty satisfying and no hassles and easy to use. So I hope that's prioritized in the future, whatever their plans may be. And I hope that they do have an attitude, especially with the handhelds, that Windows does need to be fundamentally transformed, and it's not just the Xbox app, because if that's what they think, then I'm going to be installing Bazan on everything until the end of time, or with SteamOS, or whatever the equivalent is, right?
Well, there are foundational issues on PC that in an area that Microsoft curates that they need to sort out. DX12 issues, stutter struggle, the whole thing. So maybe it is just like an overall push just to get Windows into a good state for gaming, a better state for gaming, and then the hardware comes with it. That's a pretty tall order, though, I have to admit. But I guess with that, interesting interview. But let's move on. Right, so yes, we're in crunch time. There's a lot going on at Digital Foundry. There's a lot going on in the games industry at the moment. So many releases, so many PlayStation 5 Pro patch updates. Unfortunately, the size of the Digital Foundry team doesn't organically grow or shrink depending on how many games are out there. So, we're behind with certain stuff. Last week, we could only take a very quick look at Death Stranding, literally first half an hour of play, basically. This week, we've got a Lego Horizon Adventures, which we've all had a look at this point. And it's a really interesting game, right, John? I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, we've got PC releases. I haven't had time to look at the PC. We've taken a look at the game on PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch. And in terms of scalability from low-end hardware up to PlayStation 5, this is really impressive stuff, I think.
Yeah, to start with just the pure tech side of things and the visual side of things, they've done a remarkable job. This is actually like a masterclass in how to bring a game to multiple platforms with hugely variable power. Because, this game looks stunning on PlayStation 5. It does seem to take advantage of features such as Lumen to really boost the lighting quality. You're seeing some current generation stuff going on. Yet the Nintendo Switch version, which looks rather different in its own way, is actually beautiful, and it's so good looking that it's arguably one of the better looking games I think I've seen on Switch in a long time. The image quality is sharp, it's very clean, there's a ton of detail in the scenes. They've retained the base visual design of the game, but they've taken different approaches to its technology that makes sense, right? You're not getting those latest features, but it's not just like going into a PC game and setting everything to low or lower than low and calling it a day. They've really taken care with the art and visual design to ensure that it looks good on its own terms.
Absolutely.
And that super impressed me. But also on the PS5 side, which is what I played mostly, like it runs like a dream in performance mode. The HDR is quite stunning, or at least it's just a very bright, colorful game. I was really impressed with all of that, of course. And it honestly plays pretty well. I was surprised by, so I haven't played enough I can't pass a review judgment, but I've played for a couple of hours and I feel like it's like a straightforward sort of platform action game with a sort of like hub in between. And I thought it was a lot more fun than the typical Traveler's Tales style Lego game. Like just the mechanics of engaging with the different enemies, the way you target and like attack, hiding in the grass. It's like it's a fun way to sort of bring those Horizon mechanics into a much more straightforward sort of action game, rather than like a full open world experience. And that's quite cool. So, but there was, you also did some other looks. I mostly only played in performance mode, but you actually did some testing with the quality mode as well. And we also kind of determined that the game doesn't really seem to support PS5 Pro.
No, there's no pro patch for it, and you would expect that if there's DRS in play that you would get increased resolution, but I didn't really see massive evidence of because image quality is actually really good on PlayStation 5 anyway. So if there was any improvements there, it would be kind of like diminishing returns. You're quite right. I mean, I haven't supplied any performance data for Oliver because it's really straightforward. It runs at 60 frames per second. I've never seen it drop. I mean, when I captured all of this footage, I've got a little frame rate counter in our tool, and it never variates from 60 based on the footage that we've got here, at least. You switch to quality mode, and it runs at 30 frames per second. There is and you've got the side-by-sides here, and it still kind of looks the same, but you do some A to B comparisons here, and there's something curious. I mean, it looks like a sort of... something happening with GI or volumetrics, perhaps, which seems to have been ratcheted up a level on the quality mode. But we haven't quite got to grips with, it's obviously richer, but why this is happening?
It can't be richer than you, though.
Well, who knows? Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, outside of the minutia, I mean, I think that, like John said, the Switch version scales really, really nicely here. You're just losing that lumen. You're losing VSMs, shadows, it looks like. Yeah, the shadows for sure. Resolution probably takes a big hit, I expect. And of course, it's 30 FPS, but outside of that, it looks pretty reasonable. I think one thing they do quite nicely here is they keep SSR in the mix, which is not always a given for Switch titles. And that gives you a pretty decent lighting response on those glossy Lego bricks, which is quite critical here, I think, to give you that kind of Lego feel and look. In terms of the other platform that we're looking at here, the PS5, and I suppose by extension the PS5 Pro, because there's no Pro patch, I think it looks great. It's got a big scope to it relative to something like Lego Builder's Adventures, or Builder's Journey rather there. And one thing I really like that John also pointed out, I think, with Builder's Journey is that they're doing everything almost entirely with Lego bricks here, which is really cool. They're also doing some stuff with a low update animation for things like waterfalls, where it's kind of like a stop motion style effect, which is cool for the animation there. Again, also
made the water in general, right?
Yeah, the water is all a low update, I think, here.
It's awesome.
When you smash enemies, they're breaking into Lego bits. That's very cool. Obviously, the enemies are made out of Lego. That's not something that's a given, like with the Traveler's Tales games, the environments were not made out of Lego bricks there. No. I think the world looks great even on the consoles here. You get the full RT feature set. I would imagine that's also on PC because you're getting Lumen there as well. In terms of how it looks overall, I think that the GI and the reflections look awesome. In terms of the overall appearance here, and in terms of the scope, and in terms of delivering that on a console, I think it's like just super, super, super impressive, and I think it looks awesome.
Yeah, one of my favorite things though is you mentioned with the using Lego bricks, they actually put in yellow Lego brick paint for climbing stuff. They illustrate where to climb using Lego pieces, and
that's hilarious.
I couldn't stop laughing at that. I love that they did that.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Oh god.
I just want to stress that the Switch version is really, really good. I mean, it is the model for how to scale the Unreal Engine 5 game down to the Nintendo Switch. It looks really good. There's no sense that you're being shortchanged that much in terms of detail. The lighting, of course, it's going to be very, very different. You're not going to get Lumen on the Nintendo Switch, but based, just looking at it as a Switch game, it's perfectly fine. It looks really good. The detail level is excellent. The resolution, I'm not looking at this thinking it's, blurry or anything like that. I think it looks fine. Certainly when I was playing it docked. I've not checked it out handheld, by the way. But, these are just first impressions. But yes, the frame rate on Switch is 30. There's some wobbles in cutscenes, but even that's fairly okay. It just plays really, really well. I've got to say, this is quite impressive stuff. So, certainly based on these first impressions, I'd say, it's recommended. But obviously, we don't have the time to play it all the way through and do deep dive technical analysis. But, I've got to say, I was quite impressed.
There's quite some variability in the reviews as well, from like upwards of 90 down to 40 on Metacritic. And just reading through some of them, I was curious. I mean, it just seems like fundamentally, some people just got along with the simple action, and others people just found it not enjoyable at all. And that's kind of how I felt about the Traveler's Tales games, where I always found them kind of somewhat boring, but a lot of people love them as well. This seemed a little bit more fun to me, but not something I would rate super high necessarily, but it's like, it's an above average sort of little game that could be a lot of fun to play with a partner in co-op. So I'm curious to give it more of a shot, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It should keep you occupied until NAC 3 comes there, John.
Dude, man, I was playing NAC 2 recently on the PS5 Pro. I'd like to think I'm the first person. Maybe Cerny probably already tested it, but beyond Mark, I'm probably one of the only people who have loaded up NAC 2 on the PS5 Pro. I'd like to think it's a good game. It's actually
it's a great game. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's Lego Horizon. We like it. Let's move on. We've been waiting a long time for this one, haven't we, John? I mean, the classic Halo 2 E3 demo, the demo that was, basically not anything like the final game, really. But we've always wanted to play it. We never have been able to play it, but you can now on PC, right?
So yes, essentially a group of developers that go by DigSite was working directly with, I guess, 343 and all the archive data from that original demo. So this is the original demo running on hardware. And they essentially found a way to restore and make it work within the Master Chief Collection. And it has been released on Steam in the workshop as a free download for use with the Master Chief Collection. So, which automatically, that is one downside. You can't play it on Xbox currently because it is basically a mod, right? So, which is a shame. That would have been cool. But the thing about this demo is like, Rich for sure would know, but like Halo was a big deal. Halo is the game that made Xbox. I maintain that if they did not have Halo, Xbox would not have survived. It was that important. It was that good. And the announcement of Halo 2 and showcasing it was just, it was a big event. Like, this is the second show. So E3 2003, right? We'd already seen a teaser of Master Chief, like sort of like letting the bomb out of the ship there, which kind of was recreated in the final game, but there's sort of this teaser trailer. But this was the first like real showcase of what they wanted to do with the gameplay. And I remember watching this trailer through small little, very low quality MOVs or whatever was available, QuickTime videos back in the day. I don't know, Rich, were you at the C3?
I wasn't, no.
Oh man, see, because like they even have the whole Sergeant Johnson like welcoming people into the theater, which by the way was recreated in this new version on Steam. The whole thing of he's like, sit down, this is no smoke and mirrors, it's all real time kind of stuff. Like that's even in there, right? But like this was monumental when they showed this, and the scale, the quality of the visuals, everything was like, wow, look at this. They showed off the battle rifle, they showed off dual wielding, they showed off the fact that now AI companions can drive the warthogs and you can man the turrets. They showed things like how you can essentially commandeer enemy vehicles, which became a huge mechanic as well. Basically, it was a chance to showcase all the mechanics, but as we know, it never actually showed up in game because this was fundamentally just a demo that was intended to be viewed and played as a trailer. It was like a concept of, here's what we're trying to do with Halo 2. But now you can play it. And when you first started up in the Master Chief Collection, they actually put a screen in sort of warning you of the fact that, hey, this is a scripted demo. It was meant to be played live by somebody that knows exactly what to do, because as I quickly discovered, and I think is very cool, if you don't follow the individual script points, as in trigger each event, the demo just essentially stops moving forward. So like if you like, there's this part early on where you're like zooming in, shooting, enemies down off this bridge, and you're supposed to go up to this guy that's leaning against the pillar, and and he's like, cover me, as he gets up to the turret. But I just walked right past him the first time because I forgot about him, and like, just nothing happens. Like, you can start walking around the whole level and there's nobody in it. It's just completely empty. And you can go to all the different areas of the map that were never actually like really finished, right? Because they only really modeled out all these areas in detail where the player is supposed to look in this demo, but everything else is unfinished. And it's just cool as heck to see these like completely unfinished, like basically flat textured, like wide open spaces that you're not supposed to go to. And it gives you a peek behind the magic. It's also the same with like taking over enemy vehicles, because like there's that part later in the demo where you get knocked off of the warthog by a brute, and then there's a couple ghosts coming for you, and you're supposed to commandeer one. And I didn't realize it was scripted, so I tried to do it like the normal game, and I actually kind of knocked one of them off and I went for it. But then the other one comes off for the scripted moment, and it just kind of automatically sticks you into it. It's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm commandeering this one then. And then you take over control of this. And it's, but they got all the cutscenes there. And one of the things that really tickled me is like in the low res video, when you look at this initial screen of the Pelican flying into New Mombasa, like it just is this awesome, crazy looking city. But in reality, it's just this like ultra low resolution 2D image with like particles being generated for smoke. And then the Pelican is the only other 3D object in the scene. So it really reveals all the smoke and mirrors going on here. And it ends up looking like, okay, this is maybe, it doesn't hold up in 4K, for instance. Like you can see all the issues with the graphics and the textures and everything kind of compared to when you saw it running low. You can change the res scale, but I feel like I would have loved if they could find a way to do some sort of like a CRT, like low res 480p style shader to simulate what it might look like on an original Xbox. But even still, what they have here is extremely cool. And if you have any interest in the history of this series, and if you were there during this time, I don't need to tell you how important this was as like a demo. This was one of the showcase pieces. You've got to go check this out. It's just so freaking cool is the only way I could describe it.
Is it true? I seem to recall reading on Twitter, aka X, that you queued at midnight to get this game.
I did indeed. I think this was the first individual game midnight launch I did. I had gone out for systems before, but not games. And I went to a local mall, the Northgate Mall, I think it was in Cincinnati, and the EB Games there, which that's curiously my sister worked there at the time. And we all waited up. We queued up at midnight, and I got that the steel case version with where the manual is like a Covenant version of the manual instead of from the human side. I still got that version, of course, and then I basically took it home that night and played the campaign for about 3 hours until like 4:30 a.m. or something. then I went to bed.
Wow.
I was very satisfied with it. Like, I know some people had some complaints. They didn't love the Arbiter stuff. I thought it was awesome, but like just the core mechanics, the way it played, even with so one of the weird technical things that Halo 2 introduced that had never been seen before is texture pop-in. Because this is a game that was very forward looking, and that they were using a lot of normal maps and like other techniques that would become very modern, right? To simulate 3D depth using textures. This was all kind of kicking off around 2004. That's when we really started to see it. Halo 2 was one of the games that did it. And I guess the Xbox just didn't have the memory necessary to do this super smoothly without that. And so like, essentially, especially in cutscenes, every time the camera would cut to a different angle, you'd see the scene for a bit without any textures, or like without the complete textures. And you actually see them kind of pop in real time as it tried to catch up, which was a little jarring, but still that first time you're in the city and it's getting torn to bits, and you actually jump down into the walker, I'm forgetting the name of it, in that canal and take it out. It's like, oh man, I just get so excited thinking about Halo 2. And then all the multiplayer, like, so that was one of the last games where I was really into the multiplayer. I played so much Halo 2 multiplayer. It's just an awesome game, man. And the thing about the multiplayer in Halo is just like, it wasn't about loadouts necessarily. It wasn't about like leveling things. It was like, there's things in the map. There's different modes. You can change that, of course, but just like learning the maps, knowing where stuff is, the rock, paper, scissor element of Halo combat is just awesome. What a game, man.
Hasn't there been some revisionism on the whole concept of the stencil shadows that defined part of the look of
that's a good point. Right. So the original, so as it turns out, so one of the developers actually commented on this, that 2003 demo, because the video quality is so low, it was hard to tell. We thought it was still using the stencil engine of the 2002 initial teaser, but by 2003 it was gone. They're not using stencil shadows here. They're using unfiltered shadow maps, which for 2003 is nuts. Like, nobody was really doing shadow maps yet. Like, that was a very new concept and very, very expensive, as Bungie found out, because they weren't really able to do it at large scale in the final game. There was some shadow casting lights with shadow map stuff going on in the final, but it was rare. Where in this demo, everything was casting shadows. But because of its low resolution, unfiltered nature, it had this pretty sharp look to it, actually. And the team took great care to recreate that look in this new downloadable like add-on for the Master Chief Collection. So it actually looks vaguely stencil shadow-ish. Basically everything about like the depth of field, the shadows, the way the textures, the way the lighting works, all that stuff has been so carefully recreated that it's honestly shocking to see.
Shocking in a good way.
In a good way. It's really cool. The cutscenes are 30 FPS, which that makes sense. I'm sure that's how they were built originally. This was never intended to be displayed at high frame rates, but you can actually play through the demo with all the MCC improvements, including a high FOV. You can play at whatever frame rate you want. I played it on the 480 hertz monitor and was enjoying it there. It's crazy, man. You can see I'm just getting excited because I love this stuff so much. And, you know, we were talking about Xbox earlier and what it is. And like, this is the Xbox that I love the most. This era was extremely exciting. And this was just before they would like hit it out of the park with Xbox 360 the following year. Microsoft, they were on fire at this point, and this in a good way, like in an NBA Jam way, they were on fire. And this was definitely part of that for sure. And this showing was legendary for that reason. And that show, E3 2003, man. Doom 3 was shown there. Half-Life 2 was there. I think this was where Metal Gear Solid 3 was revealed and shown. Like, all these big games that are legendary now were all there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oliver, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, one thing that did come to mind is when you look at the armor and the characters here, I think you really do see the extent to which they designed everything, with the idea that you'd have that contrast and that detail and expose that armor intricacies with a dynamic shadow system, whether that's shadow maps or, or stencil shadows there. It looks so much better. The self shadows really do give that armor that sense of depth and the lighting looking correct that you did not get in that final game with the kind of weird looking characters that kind of look bolted together a little bit. Unfortunately, one thing that I would like to get a taste of here is that the footage I'm looking at right now is like super high resolution, like 4K 60. So I think to get that proper E3 demo experience, you do need a little bit of a lower res source here, because running the game at 4K 60 does expose some things, like the fact that the environments are pretty basic there. I think the characters still look really good, but I think you probably do want that 4K, or rather not that 4K, that
480p.
that 480p 30 experience, hopefully in a CRT there, to get the full impact of this game's visual presentation. Because I do
go ahead and click on that link there, Oliver, that I just put in the Discord there. I think just looking at that, when you compare it to what you see in high res, it really changes what you perceive about the game's visuals in its original form.
Yeah, there is certainly something to it, and something to having that kind of limitation in terms of the fidelity and the resolution that is filling in gaps in your mind and giving you this impression of like, this is a really detailed, crazy game. And then when you see it kind of exposed in 4K, as you do see here, then it's kind of like, well, it's still very impressive, and there are aspects of it that hold up, and then other aspects that are like, well, if we were doing this today, obviously it would look a lot better. So yeah, I do think it's a compelling demo. I think it's cool that it's out there, and I think it's cool that it's playable, even if it is playable only really in a technical sense, perhaps, relative to what you'd expect from an actual playable segment of a game.
What's your experience with Halo 2, by the way, Oliver?
Oh, I played Halo 2 for the first time back in it was right before Halo 3 came out. So it was maybe 2006 or 2007.
You were still in the zeitgeist then, basically. It was still Halo Mania was on.
The first Halo game I played was Halo 1 on PC in 2004, I think.
The Randy Pitchford special.
Yeah, I played a ton of Halo 1 multiplayer, lots of maps, probably doing things I really shouldn't have been doing at that age, late into the night. But yeah, I really enjoyed the Halo games, all up until Halo Reach. There were huge games with me and my friends.
Man.
Yeah.
Oliver, I would love to get a multiplayer match with us sometime together, like a DF, death match of Halo 2 or something. We should look into that.
Yeah, be fun.
Awesome. Brilliant. Okay, let's move on. Okay, next news story of the week. And this one's doesn't particularly strike me as particularly interesting or indeed exciting at all. But, there seems to be a lot of people discussing the PlayStation 5 price point. And we now have Sony president Hiroki Totoki saying that the price hasn't had any negative effect on the sales of the console. The quote actually is, "Hardcore users are the target of this device. In terms of the pricing, many people made different comments on that." That's true. But pricing on PS5 Pro has not had a negative impact, I don't think. So we're talking about a $700 console, £700, €800. And there's also been comments that PlayStation 5 Pro has not sold out. You can buy one. Alex actually bought one that arrived just after launch, and there's been comeuppance for the scalpers who have basically had to reduce their prices to below retail in order to shift them, which is kind of the way it should be. But I guess the flip side to that is that, as predicted months ago, the optical drive is completely out of stock. And I'm seeing it now going in the UK. I mean, it's £100 in the UK, which is already shockingly expensive for what it is. But it's going now for anything between £150 to £200. So it's not all good news on the scalping front. But Oliver, if we're looking at this in terms of, how a typical piece of consumer electronics is released to the public, this concept of a sellout and not being able to buy one, having to spend a fortune on eBay, people kind of expect it to be the norm, but it's not. It was a COVID thing, really, wasn't it? I suppose thinking back, going all the way back to 2005, there was a supply issue of Xbox 360. That was scalped as well. And I remember that one. But this is kind of just the way it should be, right? You a piece of machinery comes out that you want, you don't have to pre-order it. You just go out and buy it. That's sort of the way it should be, right?
Yeah, I mean, if everything goes to plan on the console manufacturing side and design side of things, you'd assume that by launch, they should have sufficient inventory to serve their player base there, ideally. And that is the case for most consumer electronics launches these days, like even for devices that are in very high demand and are produced to a very strict schedule, like new iPhones. Those are typically not selling out, or at least not selling out in a very dramatic way on day one. Usually you get pretty good delivery times for those, in my experience at least. So it is unusual. It is more of a console thing to be sold out because they're produced, I think, with a stricter set of timelines and probably a little bit less volume up front because they expect to be producing them for a long period after the launch of the console. Here, I think that the high pricing probably doesn't hurt them that much in the short term, because users that'll be there on day one will probably be there on day one regardless of price, is my suspicion. So I wouldn't really read in too much into this either way. I think you're going to get substantial interest motivated users regardless of the price there. I think it could have more of an effect on long-term sales because, you know, a console that's $250 more than the base machine instead of $100 more than the base machine as it was last generation of PS4 Pro, that is a really big difference. Even if it is catering to that minority of users, I think that it might be a smaller percentage in the end than the 20% of PlayStation 4 platform lifetime sales that the PlayStation 4 Pro approach there. But ultimately, I kind of look at it in a broader perspective, in the sense that I don't really think the issue with consoles right now is the price of the PS5 Pro. I think it's like the high price of consoles in general and the higher price possibly of consoles going forward. Because you look at the PS5 Pro and you're kind of getting a lot of what you'd like out of a more powerful system, out of possibly a next-gen system even in some respects, but it costs $700. So if the next PlayStation is $600 or $700 for that higher-end console experience, that works for me. Personally, I suspect for a lot of players, it's probably not going to work for them. So I do strongly suspect that the next PlayStation will probably have to be bifurcated to some degree, whether that's a more expansive cloud offering, whether that's a Series S style junior home console, or whether probably most plausibly that's a handheld console. I think that's probably the more likely possibility there.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think that you need to basically give yourself a good platform to give yourself a good base for software sales. And I think keeping that hardware platform rather, broad is very, very important. But on the flip side, I'd also contend that that's something that's affecting everyone, including on the PC side of things. So it really is something that people have to address in a more broad spectrum manner. And I could totally imagine Sony coming out, let's say in 2027, 2028, with their new console hardware and basically saying, you know, in kind of a Microsoft circa Xbox One era style move there, pitching their last generation console and continuing to sell it for a little period there as an alternative to their higher price current generation console. And indeed trying to get games that scale all the way from low power platforms to much higher power platforms, possibly by employing ray tracing on those higher end platforms, in order to get the scaling that you need to hit a total effective market size of hundreds of millions of players instead of like tens of millions or single digit millions of players, as would normally be the case with a recent console launch.
Well, I've been thinking about what we were talking about earlier, about why Xbox is waiting some years to get a handheld out. And, you know, one potential theory there, for their next home system, they're talking about the biggest generational leap. That's not going to be provided by GPU teraflops, that's for sure. It's likely to be AI. And I think that if you're going to be putting out a handheld, you're going to have to recognize that shift in terms of where the performance is actually coming from. So maybe the reason why is to actually shift to a more AI-based piece of hardware that doesn't exist in the handheld space yet. Just going back to pricing, there's just a problem with consoles being too expensive. There was the leak, which turned out to be happening, of, you know, you can get a PlayStation 5 Slim for $380. That's going to be $70 off, but it's only $20 off compared to the 2020 price. That's slightly problematic. I actually bought a disc PlayStation 5 for £399, but I think that was last year. So, you know, prices are just not shifting downwards. However, there is this interesting phenomenon happening. we got this question from Harron Butt. What are your thoughts on the PlayStation 5 Professional getting an unofficial £40 price cut at many retailers within a week of release in the UK? And I actually just took a look at Google Shopping to see what the prices are, and lo and behold, John Lewis is doing it for £660.
Oh man!
And Curry's or Curry's PC World,
I love it.
Store, John. Curry's PC World. They're doing it for 660. The mobile phone operator EE is doing it for 660. Well, I think first of all that, obviously part of the inflated price point of PlayStation 5 Professional may well be that, it's a pro console. It's going to go to a hardcore series of users who are likely to buy it anyway. Retail partners, you are going to actually get some margin on this one this time. And, they're actually deciding to maybe shave off that margin and give it back to end users. But I'm curious, John, whether there's been any sort of shift on pricing for the Professional in Europe, where I'd say the cost is obscenely high.
Oh, that's a good question. My last few visits to MediaMarkt and Saturn and all that has produced results that suggest that they have not yet done so. But that was within the last week, so everything that I saw was just normal MSRP, which is extremely expensive. What I did notice, though, is that, as with most anywhere, getting the disk drive is basically impossible. So it's just not available. It's
just been a massive oversight, really. The disk drive situation really isn't great. What can I say? And, just going to highlight it again. You can save the cost of the disk drive with like 2 or 3 game purchases. That's the way it is at the moment with the pricing on the PlayStation Store versus, picking up a disc used. That's the bottom line. It's basic economics there. It's not great at all. But, elsewhere in terms of pricing, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The main issue is going to be what's going to happen next gen, because I honestly think the PlayStation 5 Pro is priced like it is because it's an expensive machine to make.
Yeah.
And if they could price reduce the base console, they would,
Yep.
And we're seeing that they can't really 4 years on. That's a bit of a problem.
Well, they got to do it in time. If they could time it next year for GTA 6, they'd have something, right? Drop both models, just $100 even, as much as they can. Get that down for GTA 6. They'd probably make bank.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, some interesting news has emerged from developer Shift Up. They're saying that they're quote unquote considering releasing Stellar Blade on the PC. Obviously, it's currently exclusive to PlayStation 5 and PS5 Pro. Excellent game. Well, just the way things are going, John, it's almost certainly going to be coming on PC, and this is kind of just a hint of things to come. We've got concerns, though, obviously, simply due to the fact it's an Unreal Engine game. We were talking about it in the Slack channel yesterday. Alex is concerned about it. But with that said, this is like the smoothest Unreal Engine game. Well, actually, Lego Horizon's actually very, very smooth as well. Yeah. But this is actually a really strong performer on PlayStation 5, and you would hope that would transition across to PC.
The problem, though, Rich, is that this is still Unreal Engine 4 based, right? And as a result, like UE4 on PC specifically has always proven to be somewhat troublesome in terms of the dreaded stutter struggle, has it not? Especially when dealing with games with large environments like this. But we also know it's not impossible to eliminate those. So there is still some hope, and hopefully at this point they're aware of what's been done. But these guys, it's really difficult to say how that's going to turn out. We really can't guess for sure. We just know that there are those potential weak points with these big open UE4 based games where it could become an issue. But you're right, on console at least, it is a very performant game, especially on the Pro now, but even in the original. And I think it makes a lot of sense on PC. I think this is a really phenomenal game. I actually would say, despite the attention that Black Myth got, and it was good as well, I think this is a much better game overall.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like the game itself, the whole experience is really good. in this. It's definitely one of the best games I've played this entire year, I would say. It's really, really well done. Like the action is super tight, well designed. The storytelling, the level design, it's all really, really well done. It is not just a Souls style game either. It's its own thing. It has elements of that, but it's also very much its own thing in a way that Wukong is less so. I felt like that was very much trying to be a Souls-like game in a lot of ways. And it was good as well, but it just didn't grab me in the same way as this one, I would say, overall. So I really hope that they can pull this off on PC properly, because I think there's a big audience there, as sales of a lot of these games have proven, right? I think more than like releasing God of War Ragnarok or something, this would probably do better on PC.
Well, actually, Shift Up agree with you, because they're talking that this whole conversation happened in a Q&A session from its quarterly financial results, according to Video Games Chronicle, and the release is being considered within 2025, considering recent trends such as Steam's expanding market share in the AAA game sector and the global success of Black Myth Wukong. We expect the performance on PC to exceed that on consoles. That's pretty bullish stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, Oliver, thoughts?
Well, I guess I'd ask John a question first, which would be like, on PS5 Pro, you're basically happy with that version, right? Like that's kind of
extremely happy, yeah.
Yeah. So that's giving you kind of the image quality and performance that maybe you would expect out of a PC version. So maybe that's the way to go here. My concern here would be that given it's a UE4 title, could have issues with shader comp, could have issues with traversal stutter, big time. We do see some traversal stutter issues on console, but some of them seem to show up only on PC. Like we were testing Jedi Survivor recently, me and Alex, and I've been testing it on PS5 and PS5 Pro there. And the Kobo run, the infamous Kobo run, which previously we did not do too much testing on console. We finally did that on console, and it's just about perfect on console at 60 FPS on a CPU that's equivalent to a Ryzen 5 3600, roughly speaking. On my 13700K machine, which is a much, much higher end CPU, obviously, than what's present in the consoles, it stutters very badly. And indeed, the entire game stutters very badly, especially with ray tracing turned on. It's a real stutter fest there. Not very good. And there are some problems with animation stutter as well. So yeah, I just have some concerns around the state of Unreal on PC. We also saw, like with Silent Hill recently, the state of how much worse, I guess, PC can be relative to consoles, but also how bad Unreal can be on PC in particular at times. So I'd have concerns over that. And yeah, at least to me, based on what John has said about Stellar Blade on PS5 Pro, my preferred option would be to just stick with the console there that's delivering a good, smooth experience and probably not have to deal with some issues that would probably pop up on the PC port.
I was just kind of amused. Sorry, I was just kind of amused by your concept of a stutter fest. A literal festival of stutter. That would be quite something, wouldn't it? Sorry, John.
No, I think
interrupted you there.
the thing Oliver raised, it's like, Jedi Survivor is in the similar boat to this. It's a high-end UE4 game, but when you look at like Silent Hill 2 and others, those UE5 is still very much in active development, right? Whereas the old UE4 stuff is not. And I feel like we never actually got a proper resolution on big scale UE4 games on PC because they've largely not run very well. There's been exceptions. Gears 5 was great. Days Gone in its current form is really good. They're definitely out there, but I feel like they're kind of the exception in terms of just like, oh yeah, you can usually expect both shader comp stutter and traversal stutter, among other things, as we see with Jedi, which is just a freaking mess still. Hopefully it won't be like that, though, because Stellar Blade never had really console problems either, like Jedi did, because Jedi did have issues at first, but it also doesn't have ray tracing. So
Jedi was really messy on consoles to begin with, at least with respect to image quality and performance in the performance mode, which was not so aptly named as it turned out, especially in the early areas. And then it got a lot better, and now we have PS5 Pro, which has its own issues, unfortunately, but at least performance is good. Performance is good there, so it has been improved quite a bit in that respect relative to how it was.
Okay, good stuff. Let's move on. Okay, so recently Intel released its Arrow Lake S series of CPUs, and it was a highly contentious launch. Obviously, gaming performance dominated the discourse there, where it was, I'd say, how can I describe it? Extremely disappointing. There were sort of signs that it could actually deliver what Intel said it could, which is effectively gaming parity with the 14900K at much lower wattages. But there were so many outlier performances issues. Actually, they're not really outliers. The outliers were the ones where it said, where it actually delivered what Intel said it would. Now Intel has basically come up to say that in December there's going to be changes made to the platform that should address some of the performance problems. And here's the thing, though, I've got a quote here from Robert Hallock from Intel. I think what people have been interested to hear is what happened. I can't go into all the details yet, but we identified a series of multi-factor issues at the OS level, at the BIOS level. And I would say that the performance we saw in reviews, that through no fault of reviewers, is not what we expected and not what we intended. The launch just didn't go as planned. That has been a humbling lesson for all of us, inspiring a fairly large response internally to get to the bottom of what happened and to fix it. Now, since then, since Arrow Lake launch, there's been a lot of people that have been going in depth into the BIOS and tinkering with it, changing, memory timings, overclocking the interconnects, that sort of thing, and they are seeing improved results. The question is the extent to which, well, first of all, this concept that the reviewers were not seeing the results that Intel were. My question is, well, what were Intel actually testing? Because, we just followed their guidance, install Windows, make sure it's this specific version of Windows, check off these particular settings, and you're good to go. So, that's what was causing all of these problems, apparently, and that's not what they were seeing within Intel. So, what were they testing? That's what I want to know. It's just kind of baffling. There was near universal consensus that something has gone horribly wrong with Arrow Lake S. I guess all we can do at this point is to wait to see what these tweaks at the OS level and the BIOS level are actually going to do. I just find it really difficult that they're going to claw back that much performance. I mean, when you looked at the Cyberpunk result, for example, which was basically on par with a 12600K, how did that happen? What did they not test? Cyberpunk, pretty much the most benchmark game on PC on an actual retail PC. This is just completely baffling to me. I don't know. Obviously, you guys are not so deeply invested in CPU benchmarking, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, Oliver?
Well, I guess, I don't know. I mean, there certainly has been a bit of a track record on PCs with CPUs recently, like with the Windows 11 H2 upgrade for improving performance with Ryzen chips, AMD Ryzen chips through some schedule improvements.
Yes.
So
that one's quite interesting because there were actual improvements. That was looking like a really tepid launch, a few percentage points off of their last generation in gaming performance. That does look to have been improved. I'm not going to say it's game changing, but, it certainly arrived at the right time because the 9800X 3D has come along and it's just, obliterated the competition there. The concept to which, though, that we're looking at so many problems at the OS level, at the BIOS level, I still wonder what Intel was testing. There were also different versions of Windows tested as well, because the reaction to Arrow Lake has been, it can't be this bad. Let's try and find out an explanation for why it is. And I still haven't actually found a convincing explanation for, with all of the testing that's been done. And actually, this is one of the great things about the PC tech press is that, the level of investigation that goes into something like this when things go wrong in an attempt to find an explanation is quite extraordinary. But I haven't seen a convincing explanation there. So I'm still kind of baffled.
I guess.
But carry on.
Yeah, I guess my question would be like, let's assume the kind of maximally best outcome for Intel here. And through a combination of, like they're implying here, through BIOS updates, through Windows updates, through, I don't know, microcode updates, whatever they're going to plan to do here, they actually do get it back to the performance they specified, which is like modestly but significantly behind something like a 7800X3D for gaming performance. Is that enough? I guess that's the question. Because like,
Right.
I kind of don't think so for gaming. I kind of don't think so for gaming at the moment, especially with the 9800X3D, the 9950X3D, and those similar high core count parts coming down the pipe soon. So for gaming, I don't think so. For productivity, you're still looking at substantially worse power efficiency relative to AMD in a lot of workloads. They can compete for price with AMD, but now we're in a space where Intel, as of 2024, is kind of like AMD from 2008 to 2017, roughly, at least to my recollection, where they're competing more with price and less with the absolute quality of their products, especially on the high end. And then you take a hit on margins, even if it is the improvement they specify here, and even if they are able to bring it back up to parity with their initial pre-launch statistics there. I'm not really sure. Like, to me, that doesn't really seem enough, at least for gaming and a lot of productivity workloads.
John, this isn't really your wheelhouse, but you must have been sort of wondering what on earth's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really do much of the benchmarking or anything with the CPU work, but I do care about the results, right? Because upgrading the CPU every, 2, 3, whatever years is something I like to do. And it does matter for both production quality, the DF work in terms of speed, but also gaming. And as I've said many times in the past, I have been staunchly in the Intel camp for years, but I'm genuinely thinking, just based on everything happening here, like, I feel like I see a Ryzen in my future. So I can see on the horizon that, what would you suggest as an expert? Like, so, I have a 12900K in my system. When would you think is the right time to stab, and which CPU would you suggest to someone like me? Let's say there's other users in a similar boat. They want the high-end CPU performance.
Right. Okay. So I'm on the 13900K, which is the next generation on from you, and it is significantly faster. And I get also the benefit because I think you're still using your old DDR4.
DDR4,
memory.
yeah.
Yeah. So, my system is faster and it's using faster DDR5. Happy days, but I'm considering moving, right? And the reason why, yesterday I was exporting some video and also editing at the same time, using media encoder,
right?
And it just crashed.
Oh.
So I lost the work that I was doing on the editing side. All of the time that had gone into the encoding had gone. So it's just annoying. I just want stability from the platform, and that was what Intel used to provide.
That's what the 12900K provides. It's super stable, right?
And I've said in the past that my 13900K had issues, which I thought was down to the degradation. The BIOS updates actually seem to have made it much more stable. But, I'm still getting these issues sporadically, blue screens. It's not great. So I'm considering moving. And I think basically at this point, it's really straightforward. We wait until the 9950 X3D comes from AMD, because you're looking at the X3D on the the octo-core part, the 9800 X3D, and it's actually doing really well in productivity workloads as well as gaming. So if the theory crafting out there, if the rumors are true, if it all comes to pass, we're going to be looking at a 2 CCD part that has V-cache on both of the CCDs. So it should be like monstrous for both gaming and productivity. So my advice to anybody, and indeed to you, John, is basically to wait for the final piece of the Ryzen 9000 puzzle to come about.
Sounds good.
And go from there. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's move on. Yeah, basically every week when I put together the direct topics, I ask everyone, have you got anything to contribute? And John, you said you wanted to talk about the chromatic. This is the ModRetro Chromatic, right?
That's right. Here it is.
So
I guess for listeners of the podcast, it's not that useful, but I'm holding it up now. This is another stab at sort of the portable market. Playing classic Game Boy games. It's a similar space as the Analog Pocket, similar space as modded Game Boys. I don't think this replaces the Analog Pocket in the sense that the Pocket is a much more flexible FPGA-driven machine. This is also FPGA, but The Pocket allows you to load up tons of cores on there. It's basically a portable mister at this point. This is strictly designed to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color cartridges, and that's what it does. But it has some really cool stuff going on that I think makes it a really cool product as well. First of all, the build quality is outstanding. Like, you look at this and you think, oh yeah, it looks like a plastic handheld, but it is not. It is a magnesium alloy case, and boy, does it feel just like solid. Like, it's a weird thing to say, but this back panel with the battery compartment, this is the best feeling battery compartment I've ever experienced. I cannot believe how like satisfying it is to use.
That's quite a niche statement.
It's so niche, but it's so true. Like, if you feel this, you'll know what I mean. You're like, wow, this just feels quality. And by the way, that highlights the fact this uses AA batteries, which is actually a very forward-looking thing, weirdly enough, because that means you don't have to worry about a dead rechargeable battery failing you in the years to come. But there is a recharge. You can use rechargeable batteries with this, and there's actually a pack for it. It has USB-C charging, so you can still use it like a modern built-in sort of system, but it actually has its own replaceable batteries, which is great. The screen, they're using this sort of sapphire glass on top, which is very premium, but the actual underlying LCD, this is what's very special, I guess. It's a 160 by 144 resolution screen. So they've actually matched the exact pixel resolution of Game Boy, which really hasn't been done before in this space, where usually replacement screens, they're different variable resolutions. You know, you're multiplying pixel numbers. The Analog Pocket works because it's got like a 1600 by 1440 screen, so it's in a 10x scale, so they're able to sort of simulate those pixels. And that's also useful for other FPGA cores because it can do whatever resolution. But this has a very specific look to it, where it really just looks like what you'd imagine a Game Boy Color screen should look like if it were properly backlit and of a modern quality. So the image quality is excellent on this thing. It's very bright. It's very clear in motion. Everything about it just feels really premium to use. It does use real cartridges, of course, which is always nice. If you're into that, of course. It is not designed to be an emulation style machine. There's no SD card support in here, but it does have its own sort of built-in menu system you can pop up at any time with a few different options. You know, there's brightness, there's frame blending, there's color correction to make it look more like those strange Game Boy Color colors. There's even the option to update the firmware, so it does at least have that going for it. But the actual unit experience itself is extremely old school. You put the cartridge in, you turn on the power, and it just boots, right? It's not like the Pocket that has its own like operating system, sort of menu system. You just put the cartridge in and go. And it feels great in the hand as well, because it's about the same thickness as an original Game Boy, not the Game Boy Color,
right? Which
actually feels a lot better in the hands than you might expect. It's not too thin. You have enough meat on this thing to hold it comfortably, which combined with the really great buttons, the D-pad and the two buttons here feel awesome to use. It passes the Contra Game Boy diagonal test, which is that with a lot of D-pads, you have this issue where it's difficult to move between ducking and aiming and running, and you'd often like inadvertently do one of the actions you didn't want to do, like move by accident or like stand up when you didn't want to. It has none of these issues, which surprised me as well. It feels really good. And it's what can I say? It's a machine that plays the gosh darn Game Boy. It plays Game Boy games. If you happen to have a bunch of cartridges like I do, and you want something that actually feels genuinely beautifully solid, just a well-built piece of hardware, it's a really cool option. I think this makes modded Game Boys, modded Game Boy Colors obsolete. Like, I don't actually see much reason in having a modded Game Boy Color at this point. I would only keep a regular one for like historical purposes, but the modded screens, this outdoes them all. This is better. It is not better than the Analog Pocket though, which is it's a very different machine, I would say. This has advantages over the Pocket for sure, but the two do different things overall. Also, the Pocket can do the simulation of the original DMG style Game Boy palettes with its subpixel simulation. This doesn't. This behaves like an actual Game Boy Color, which means you get those weird palettes for original Game Boy games. Where it tries to colorize them in some way. And that's just what the original hardware actually did as well. And it functions just like that. So I don't know, any questions on this thing? Anything that piques your interest?
Well, it's $200, £160.
Yep.
That's quite a lot of money, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if you wanted a modded Game Boy Color, it's within that range.
Right.
So the only thing that makes this tricky is that the Analog Pocket is it's $219 currently.
Okay.
And
that's very close.
But then analog shipping is always pretty expensive, to be fair. But if you had to choose, like, they still have black Pockets in stock, it seems. The Pocket's really darn good. It is a portable mister. Man, it's really tricky because I really like them both. If you're really just into Game Boy and Game Boy Color stuff, though, then the Chromatic is a pretty awesome choice on its own. It also, I should note that it does support video out over the USB-C port directly, which is cool. I think with the Pocket, you do need the dock to do that. And the dock is nice for the Pocket, but that adds an extra like $100 to the price, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just a matter. I mean, if you're the rare person that's out there actually like, should I get an Analog Pocket or the Chromatic? It's really kind of like you kind of have to think about your use case and what you want to do with it. Because this, I feel, more accurately recreates that old school experience by offering not much in terms of like enhancements. Like this is like basically like a premium version of what the original Game Boy Color experience could be. Whereas, like I said, Analog Pocket can do all that, but it's also basically a portable mister. So it's very, very powerful in terms of what it can offer.
Is there link cable support?
Yes. It has the port right there, just like the original. Also got a headphone jack on the bottom. Pretty decent speaker in there. You get your volume control, power on top, IR port there as well. You need that infrared action. I've played a ton of games on this so far. I have not encountered any weird compatibility issues. It seems to work very well. Even with high-end games, such as the incredible Prehistoric Man. Okay. No, it's actually not incredible. It's incredible looking, but it's not incredible by any means. It just has awesome parallax scrolling and lots of effects that you typically do not see on a Game Boy. So, Rich,
Oliver, this isn't particularly your era of gaming, is it?
This predates my interest in gaming by like 2 or 3 years probably, so it's not too far out of spec there, but I am noticing in their PR materials on their website, they have an image of a car, or at least a very large tire that looks like it'd be from a car, running over one of these Chromatic devices. So, John, do you think this could withstand that level of abuse? Or it is magnesium, it says.
I actually think it might. This thing is ridiculously solid. Like, you can try to smash it as much as you want, and the case does not flex even a little bit. Like, it feels rock freaking solid. That actually surprised me the most. Is like that's the big thing about it, is the build quality on this thing. I feel like I could throw it at the wall and it would be perfectly fine. Like, not even a dent.
Or drive over it in your car.
The Pocket, I think, is obviously a more delicate machine in comparison compared to this thing. I don't really want to throw it at the wall or run it over, but I feel like it probably could actually survive that.
Amazing scenes. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so let's crack on with supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week I ask our supporters on Patreon to put forth their suggestions for topics and questions for the panel. So we're going to move on to, it's kind of like two questions in one, really. Going back to Microsoft, in fact. This one from some guy person. On August the 1st, I mentioned how I felt the next generation console would just be a gaming PC and the largest generational leap, quote unquote, will be accomplished just by running the largest Nvidia GPU and the best CPU money could buy. I love the fact that some guy person seems to have put out a statement on August the 1st. And he's just referred to that statement. Anyway, with Microsoft's recent ad about how everything is now an Xbox, do you tend to agree that the next Xbox will just be a top-end gaming PC? Do you think Microsoft is just a gaming brand and has nothing to do with dedicated hardware now? This one from James Prendergast. Given the hard pivot Xbox division messaging has done, is this quote-unquote largest generational leap even happening anymore? It would seem to be at odds with this philosophy of equalism. So this is an interesting sort of byproduct of the messaging that Microsoft is putting out right now, which is, if everything is an Xbox, what's the point of making, dare I say it, a bespoke hardware design? As I understand it, Microsoft has gone on the record to confirm they're in on Gen 10, right? There's going to be a Gen 10 console. We've also just had the comments from the Bloomberg interview that there's definitely going to be a handheld. It's just going to be arriving in a few days' time. But at the same time, some guy person might be onto something here in that, I do think there's probably going to be some revamp or changes to Windows, which essentially means that whatever your PC is, it could be considered an Xbox. That would be the logical route forward. Oliver, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it could very well be a possibility here, but I also think that I don't really think it would be just a PC. I mean, if they were to go down this road, I think they would have something branded as an Xbox and something that contains a controller in the box and things like this. Looks like an Xbox. I don't really think they would go down the full route of just shipping you, some Alienware monstrosity and saying that's an Xbox. I really don't think that would be the case. And I also don't think it'd be the case that they would just be selling you a $5,000 PC. I presume they'd have a lot of lower end SKUs as well. But I also don't think they're necessarily talking about GPU size, at least not exclusively with that greatest generational leap quote. I think they're probably talking about machine learning to some degree as well, some substantial degree as well. But I do agree that Xbox is more of a gaming brand, or becoming more of a gaming brand than a discrete platform. I think the problem with that potentially is that as you cede control over that direct and dedicated Xbox platform, that Xbox console, you're also ceding some control over the overall user experience. And then if you're going over to Windows, Windows has a whole bag of problems and issues for use as something that could approximate that Xbox experience there. And streaming is its whole can of worms. So I think that personally, that is potentially a viable way they would go. I think that they will continue to embrace the multi-SKU strategy, though. I would not expect extremely high-end gaming PC or something that's similar to that to be the only venue into the next generation Xbox console. I'd expect lots of SKUs, including the handheld as well, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there was a comment in the Bloomberg interview that Phil did that they're not going to be putting out $1,000 console. That doesn't seem to be the future for them. So some guy person's conceit here that they just put the largest, the best performing parts into a box probably isn't the best way forward. It's not going to do, well, as Phil said, it's not going to do anything for improving their total addressable market. I just think that by virtue of the fact that Windows is probably going to change to be more gaming friendly and accommodate consoles and handhelds, it would just happen anyway. John?
Man, they didn't say what the largest generational leap actually refers to. It could just be leap of logic, leap of anything,
leap
right?
Of logic.
So who knows?
A leap of faith, even.
Yeah, exactly. A leap of faith, the largest leap of faith in console history. It's gonna happen. Man, yeah, they're in such a weird position. right now. I mean, we've talked about this a lot in terms of where do they go next. And there's been so many hints along the way with these different SKUs and all that. But I think you're right. Like just this idea though of doing like a just be a top end gaming PC, the power is definitely not the issue. I just think they've changed. They've realized they need to change course, and that maybe the old console market model doesn't work anymore. I mean, the original idea for Xbox, from not the Xbox team, but from Microsoft, was to make it like a PC in the living room, right? And then obviously the original Xbox team determined back in the late 90s, early 2000s that, hey, this is not the time to do this. The hardware, the software, it is not there yet. And they were right. But it is there now, I would argue. We're actually at a point where feasibly, if done well, that's the key, that we're actually at the point where they could maybe realize that original vision for what, a Microsoft-based machine in the living room could be, and just add that in with them becoming essentially a giant publisher, and they don't need to sell tons of these things as long as, make something that's compelling enough, get enough sales, but not necessarily like the typical sales you expect from like a consolidated. Oh my gosh, what am I even saying? There's too many C words in this. But yes, either way, there's a lot we don't know, and I'm just curious to see what happens.
Well, let's go all in on that original concept and just make the console a massive X that you put down next to your TV.
I would love them to do a special edition that is just the giant X, and it comes with like cleaning solution and the microfiber cloth to keep it clean. Every single day you have to polish it. They could actually put it on a schedule where it wakes you up in the morning, and the first task is to go in and polish the X before you go about your day.
God. Oh dear. Polish the X. I've heard it all now. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Okay, this one comes from Bespoke exclamation point. Good name. And we're still on Microsoft here. With yet another Xbox quote-unquote exclusive confirmed not to have a physical disc release. It's avowed, in case you didn't see, what will happen with Xbox's great backwards compatibility next gen when they won't offer a disc drive. Frankly, I don't know why they bothered with one this gen, considering most Series X games use the disc just to initiate a download. Xbox has basically become the Xbox One E3 2013 vision. John! Exclamation point. I like this bit. Would you like to take point on this one?
Oh, man. I mean, I guess, okay. So first of all, he says Xbox has basically become the Xbox One E3 2013 vision. And thus far, that's not entirely true. Because of the fact that the one thing that was missing was like what they were talking about back then was, even if you did buy a disc version, you needed to activate each copy. And if you essentially sold that copy, that you wouldn't be able to just sell it or give it to somebody and then they just use the disc, and then the disc is the key. There was a more of an online registration component to it. And there's definitely shades of that in this, with like activating the console and whatnot, and which isn't great, but man, BC next gen, that is actually interesting. Like, you're right, on the next generation of consoles, I almost don't see. Wait, did they actually confirm? Oh no, it's the Xbox exclusive he's talking about. But like the next gen console,
yeah,
I could see it not having a disc drive at this point. But he's right in that for backwards compatibility, there are a lot of owners that are still using discs from 360, from the original Xbox with their system. And in fact, despite the digital push, there's actually a fair few number of games that are backwards compatibility that only work with the disc version, as in there is no downloadable version otherwise. So it would kill that. I find that very odd and kind of at odds with what the whole BC program was trying to be.
There's a problem now, of course, in that if you had an Xbox One or an Xbox One S and you migrated to Xbox Series S, you can't access any of your disc games, and that is a problem.
Yeah.
And, whenever we've spoken to Phil, he's all about, bringing your games with you from one generation to the next. And the concept that you can't do that with Xbox One to Xbox Series S, I think, is a massive issue, and it needs to be addressed. And if they're going to be going to all digital for next gen, then that need becomes even more pressing. So what happens? I mean, how do you do that? Do you have like a trade-in program or something? Is there something on the disc, perhaps a leftover from that from the 2013 vision that basically allows you to essentially trade in a physical copy for a digital one? We just don't know. But this is the big problem I've got at the moment, is that, and it's a similar problem that we've got with the PlayStation 5 Pro, in that, I think the people that bought the Pro are people that have probably got physical discs that they'd like to use. I mean, I've just sent my drive to Tom, because he couldn't buy one. He can't play his PS4 games on PS5 Pro. I mean, I've got a Slim at the back there, so with a disk drive. So if I need to move that across to my Pro, I can do that, right? But he can't. And it's similar, there's no options at all if they go fully digital Xbox next gen. I think you're right. I think they might. There's got to be a problem, a solution to this problem.
What's funny, Rich, is this is anecdotal, of course, but a lot of my in real life friends actually did get the PS5 Pro. They're hardcore into this stuff. They were excited for it. They bought it. But every single one of them said that if the disk drive had not been available, they would not have purchased it. So without the disk drive, it would have been a non-starter. But I think that's more true on the PlayStation side, and certainly on the Nintendo side. Whereas I think Xbox owners in general, Microsoft has been slowly grooming them to move away from discs, to the point where the Xbox fans online will often fight you for asking about physical. Like when you talk about this stuff, they get very mad about it. They don't want to hear about it. It's like, no, it's Game Pass, it's digital. You shut your mouth about these discs. Is the feeling that's the feeling I get from people. Like they not only don't care about them, they seem to be against them in a weird way. Some people, but that's just the online hardcore. I do wonder what this means though for because families and stuff, and I think physical discs still play a lot of roles in terms of getting stuff at a good cost. But again, there's the Game Pass stuff, and I mean, I think Microsoft's just going to kind of quietly move forward with this regardless, and we will probably never have a solution to these disc games.
Yeah, my thinking on this is that if Microsoft in 2020 was content to ship a console without a disk drive backwards compatibility component to it with the Series S, and if they're content in 2024 to ship a flagship version of their higher end premium console without any accommodation for discs at all, then I think probably in whatever year this launches, in the next few years, whatever, they will probably also be content to not offer a disc compatibility option on that machine, I'd suspect. And yeah, with Game Pass and with the relatively high percentage of digital sales that are on Xbox in particular, and also across all the console platforms that we see today outside of Nintendo, basically, I think they're more than content to just say, yeah, we'll have software backwards compatibility through the Xbox service, but not through disc copies of the games that you might own.
Yeah, that's unsatisfactory, but fair enough. Okay, let's move on. This one comes from Youth in Asia. Hello, DF crew! Exclamation point. There's been some speculation swirling around that an ARM-based Nvidia gaming laptop could be released as early as next year. Are you all excited by this hypothetical product? Or does the poor gaming performance of the Snapdragon X Elite temper expectations for ARM on PC? I'll answer that one first of all. The rumours seem to be suggesting that there is like an all-in-one SoC with ARM cores that is broadly equivalent to the performance of an RTX 4070, which I assume is the laptop version, at around 65 watts. Am I excited by this? By this hypothetical product? I think it is a real product, by the way. The performance level, who knows? But It's potentially exciting, simply because I really kind of want to see what an Nvidia Windows laptop would look like and how well it would run. As to whether it does run well, who knows? That's the problem, right? Snapdragon X Elite really was poor for gaming, and a lot of that was down to the fact that it just seemed to be that the driver was really, really bad. And I don't think the ARM translation element to it, Prism, I believe it's called, I don't think that was the cause of some of the horrible stuttering that I saw in like God of War and Dark Souls 3. I just think it was a bad driver by a company that didn't have experience with Windows. That is not going to be a problem with Nvidia, right? Because they've got great drivers, and whether they're running on ARM or whether they're running under Windows, they should still be good, right? The only question at this point concerns Prism. We couldn't accurately talk about Prism because in the Snapdragon X Elite, the GPU driver was so poor. But what we could say is that there were certain games that just didn't boot at all. And it seemed to be the case that anything that used AVX instructions on x86 couldn't boot. But I understand that there have been changes to that now based on what I was reading online. I can't test that because I sent the Surface laptop back because it just wasn't a good product. So I am kind of excited. I'm excited to test it. I'm not sure whether I want to own one, though. Oliver, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my questions would really have to do with that ARM side of the equation, because obviously the NVIDIA GPU side of it should be pretty bolted on a good product, I'd have to imagine. And the driver support should be excellent there. I would not worry too much about that. You know, on the Mac side of things, we do have Rosetta, and in general, I don't notice any difference between apps that might be x86 apps running through Rosetta or native ARM apps there. I know on Windows, the transition towards ARM has been a little bit rockier over the years, but the recent push does seem to be performant. I guess my question would be, if it's 90% of the way there or 95% of the way there, is that good enough? And to me, I'd kind of say, well, maybe for a handheld, it would be okay. Or maybe for an ultra portable laptop, like as is probably the target for this kind of SoC here, maybe that would be okay. But for a general purpose computer, I probably wouldn't go ARM unless it was like really, really bolted on and a good compatibility there. So I'd still be concerned about that. But if it is improving at a pretty rapid clip, and if it is in a good way by 2025, I think it could be a very compelling product.
Yeah, interesting question for you, John. Obviously, I gave you a Windows handheld. What if it was ARM-based, and what if it had an Nvidia GPU? I mean, assuming the games run, that's quite compelling, right?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of potential here for this. I think this is still early days in terms of compatibility and execution, but obviously, I think this could be great for power efficiency and just general performance as well. In a laptop,
Yeah.
versus the handheld model, I think maybe starting the laptop does make more sense because it's more easier to get the sort of general purpose computing tasks up and working well on this sort of architecture versus like saying, hey, we're all in on gaming now, and then running into a gigantic wall of issues along the way. But still, it's not something I'm currently interested in right now, but it is something that I think I'm watching because I think the potential future for this could be very positive indeed and lead to some compelling products in the space, because PCs in general have been very rooted in x86, right? Like there's just not much. They've tried this before. There's been ARM-based Windows in the past. It just never seems to really work. But because we're seeing this explosion in other areas of computing and other devices, it does kind of feel like now it might be feasible for it to really take off, but we'll see.
I mean, I did a sponsored video a while back earlier in the year about the Omen 14 with an RTX 4070. And that was super power efficient, and you could run path tracing on it. It was nuts. And so I kind of really like the idea of, what if it was actually an Nvidia handheld out there that could do ray tracing performantly, had DLSS, that had good frame generation. What can I say? I find that quite compelling, but it's the laptop first, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing it. Let's move on. This question comes from Thomas the Jank Engine.
Incredible name.
And yeah, absolutely. Hello, gents. With the PlayStation 5 Professional offering users more choices in the settings menus of enhanced games, what are the odds that we will start seeing aspect ratio choices on consoles? Even on a 16 by 9 monitor, I feel like 21 by 9 really helps give games a cinematic edge. Is that too niche for an already niche product? John, I put this question in because I was reminded of your comments on Death Stranding Director's Cut, where you preferred the 21 by 9 presentation, which you presumably played on a 16 by 9 screen.
Correct.
Now, here's the thing. I think, first of all, the question is, do you prefer those modes for specific games? Do you think it would actually be a good thing to do? Secondly, I don't really think it should actually be reserved just to PS5 Professional. It should just be there in the game if you're going to do the work, regardless of which console you got.
Yeah, so firstly, I would say I think these ultra-wide modes are very excellent. And in fact, on my PC monitor here, it's an LG C2 OLED 16 by 9 screen, but because it's 42 inches and I'm sitting at a desk, it's very large. Rich, you use a 48 inch on your desk.
Sure.
I measured it, and the size of the 21 by 9 visible image is bigger than the 38 ultra wide that I used to have as my main monitor.
Right.
So the viewable area is huge, which is why in many cases I do actually still play PC games in ultra wide mode on a 16 by 9 screen. I like it. I think it does feel immersive. It sort of fills your field of view in a way, and it reduces the amount of looking up and down. But in the console space, that's a little bit trickier because that does alter that. I think on a per game thing, it could be something that I would like to see more of. But as far as like what he's suggesting here is like a console level solution, that I feel is very much still off the table. And if we were going to see that at any point in the near future, it would be Microsoft that does it first. They've traditionally embraced alternative display modes for their consoles, whereas Sony, outside of the 1440p push, they've largely just stayed with TV standards and have mostly like not been willing to jump into the PC world in that regard. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. With what we've been talking about with Microsoft, though, we could see that on their next machine, maybe. If they really make this PC jump, right? So maybe ultra wide support at a system level will come to Xbox in the future. But yeah, I would like to see more games do this on console, because like Death Stranding, the reason there was, right, you had, if you wanted 60 FPS and you did a full screen mode, it was sub native res. But if you did the ultra wide mode, it was like a pixel matched resolution so you get 4K style like presentation, but by chopping off the top and bottom, they would kind of reduce the load a little bit. So you still get the image quality of native 4K, but you also get the wider FOV, which if you were to increase the FOV at a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, it just opens up too much on the top and bottom and it ends up looking kind of awkward, which is why it is typically reserved for like these ultra wide presentations.
I think the problem with doing a system-wide implementation is that specifically cutscenes are often authored within a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and weird things can happen on the sides. And speaking to Sony about the some of the PC ports they've done, the likes of Nixis and Jetpack Interactive have actually had to go in and fix all of those issues for ultra wide.
Yeah.
So that's a software issue that would need to be done.
Rich, I would also say, even in the PC space right now, ultra wide support is both not guaranteed and often not as well implemented as you would like. Like, it's there now, but for instance, Space Marine 2 launched without ultra wide support, which genuinely surprised me. And like you say, a lot of cutscenes still. Anything pre-rendered, cutscenes, menus, it's always a crapshoot. You don't know what it's going to be. I will say, one thing I really found awesome was in the recent Dragon Age game that Alex did the video on. They actually have an optional setting in there where it's, if you want ultra wide cutscenes, you can turn it on. They warn that weird stuff can happen in the sides, but if you want it, you got it. And I think that's great. I wish more PC games would just say, hey, you know what? There might be some weird glitches from time to time, but if you want to view your cutscenes in ultra wide, here's the option. You don't have to do like an extra mod or something to get it.
Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, personally, jeez. Oh, man.
You're not that interested.
No, I'd really like to see fewer options rather than more. I think we're really getting away from God's plan for consoles, from the console ideal here.
What
because
new meme incoming from Digital Foundry.
Yeah, I just, oh man, I just think that consoles historically have been a limited number of options, maybe a couple toggles for post-processing. Now we're getting modes up the wazoo here. I think with PS5 Pro in particular, developers should be looking at it as an opportunity to homogenize modes. I really like that in some titles. I like that in Last of Us. I like that in Star Wars Outlaws. I like that in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I think in most titles you are getting a more minimal trade-off, or you should be at least getting a more minimal trade-off at 60 FPS relative to the base console. So yeah, adding in new discrete modes, not just for new preferences, but for new display types, and not just for new refresh rates or new resolutions, but new aspect ratios. That is an interesting and untested area on console platforms. And I don't think that's the way to go. I think 16:9 is perfectly fine. I think it's a very mainstream display format. And I think outside of the realm of PC and ultra-wide monitors, you really don't see those aspect ratios on consumer sets too much at all.
Well, Oliver, let me present this then. What if Nintendo went crazy and they said, instead of doing the DS format with the dual screen, we do a 32:9 handheld?
Oh, well, this gets back there. You don't like the wide handhelds, right?
No, but they could have the controls on the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
You hold a giant ultra wide monitor right in the palm of your hands.
Yeah.
Could you have actually uncovered the Switch 2 gimmick there?
There
John?
it is. You heard it here first. 32:9 Switch 2. It's so that you can have, it's 2-player, so you can each have your own 16:9 screen when you use the kickstand.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
Bam, there it is.
I'm not sure this would adhere to God's own console philosophy that Oliver has just...
Well, I just feel like we're straying away from things. I feel like
flew too close to the sun, and
even with there's some really good PS5 Pro games out there, like the Insomniac titles, and like you're still getting, oh my god, now we're multiplying like 3 different toggles for AO by this many different modes by this many different toggles, and it's like this is not the way that I'd like console games to be configured personally, and I think the onus should be on the developer to provide a set of really nicely QA'd, nicely tested modes that work really well, that are, going to work for the majority of players. And I think if you want that configurability, there's a platform called that, and it's called the PC. And in a lot of cases, for the ultra-wide modes, you need patches anyways. You need fan mods anyways, so...
I just realized your comment, though, Oliver, about God's own plan for consoles. You might be referring to Mark Cerny, who his plan was about combining performance and quality modes into one. What if you didn't have to choose?
That's true. Well,
we haven't seen that many games.
That would be my preference as well.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to Evangelical Foundry coming soon. But with that, let's move on. Final question for this week comes from Todd Weitzel. Can we give Epic a biscuit for, in brackets, allegedly allowing the Internet Archive to host Unreal and Unreal Tournament install media indefinitely? That's an interesting story that's he's just linked us here to Rock, Paper, Shotgun. It's been kind of weird, John, that Epic has, for the last few years, basically almost disavowed itself of the original Unreal and Unreal Tournament. But this looks like a welcome development, am I right?
Yeah, you're right. Like, it did feel like they were snubbing the original Unreal. I always wondered if it was just because they were afraid of like brand confusion at this point, because Unreal, the game IP, isn't really that valuable to them at this point. It's Unreal, the engine, that matters, right? Mm-hmm. But I have to admit, this is a fantastic and surprising move, because these games are extremely important to the history of PC gaming. They set new standards. It basically started what Unreal Engine is now. Like this is where it came from, and the games are still fundamentally interesting, good, and fun. We did I remember when we did an Unreal tournament session with the patrons a while ago, and that was a lot of fun. I kind of want to do another one of those. The game still holds up. It's awesome. But yeah, just making them available on the Internet Archive is a fantastic idea to ensure that they remain accessible to a modern audience, however you want to play them. You know, I would love to see a proper like night dive treatment of Unreal. I would love to see Unreal RTX, those sorts of things. But this is already a very, very good step. So I respect them for this choice.
Yeah, I mean, they went to the efforts of actually delisting the first Unreal from Steam a couple of years ago, according to this RPS article, along with all other Unreal games. And you know, in the past, we've wanted to do big things with Unreal on DF Retro, for example. You know, and we've kind of made some pitches to Epic and literally zero response.
No, they don't care.
These games are really important, you know, especially the original Unreal. It definitely deserves the night dive treatment, no doubt about it.
My God, that waterfall, man. That first time you step out of the ship and you walk onto the cliffside and look down into that huge chasm. That was a go get the family, come upstairs and look at this kind of moment. And that's exactly what I did. It was that darn impressive at the time. I assume Oliver is a bit young to have experienced Unreal Mania when it launched in 98, but Rich, you would have been deep in the games world at that point. Do you remember the impact of Unreal?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I remember there was a show that was held in Earl's Court in London called ECTS.
Oh, yeah.
And GT Interactive actually had an early version of Unreal. This was like years before it actually came out, because the development time for Unreal was actually quite extended, if memory serves.
Yeah, longer than usual.
And I do remember looking at the demo for Unreal and thinking, this looks amazing, but it runs really, really badly. and it did. And it was just basically the fact that by the time it actually came out, you had systems that could actually run it well. But yes, you know, this was kind of like the big game that would be, you know, competing against id Software at the time. This was, you know, the big competition at that point. It was Tim Sweeney versus John Carmack. Those were the days.
Dude,
I think even Carmack occasionally refers to the dot plan wars.
So the dot plan stuff, that was like their personal blogs, right? They would put out dot plan files, which is basically just like a stream of consciousness of thoughts. And there was so many nuggets in there, including the famous Carmack rants about DirectX at the time, and when he went with OpenGL for GL Quake and all that. But the one that sticks out to me is I remember Tim Sweeney writing about, it's always stuck in my memory. One of the cool features of Unreal 1 was they did this like light flare attack. So essentially, when you see lights in the world, you see these sort of like big, like colorful light flares around them. And they sort of like, as you occlude them from scenery, they smoothly fade out. Tim Sweeney wrote about his experience walking home one night in a misty, sort of like rainy environment, and just noticing that light posts in real life had this effect. And just that one experience from walking home at night in the rain or whatever was enough to trigger him to just be like, I need to implement this in Unreal. And he did.
Crazy stuff. Any thoughts, Oliver?
No, I think this is a positive move here. My own personal interest in Unreal only dates back to Unreal Tournament 2004, which I played a lot of back in the day. But unfortunately, apparently that is no longer available to play online, which is a bit of a shame. So hopefully this is a bit of an indication that maybe they will be putting possibly some amount of resource into that series at some point. Because it'd be great to see some of those older games revitalized possibly for more modern platforms. And also like Unreal Tournament 3 is also quite good. I think I enjoyed that quite a bit as well. So it'd be nice to see those games available on more modern platforms. And it's nice to see them allowing this little exemption for this title as well.
Mm-hmm. Just going back to Night Dive there, John, I'd love to see Night Dive do the original Far Cry.
Oh, man.
Just
they're so
epic.
God, Man, it's just nuts how much stuff Night Dive keeps releasing, by the way. Did you
Yes.
notice how much stuff they put out this year? There's a
Yeah,
ton.
it's amazing.
Dude, there's so much.
Wow.
And they got the Thing remastered is just around the corner as well, if you remember that one. So like they won't stop. I love that they've been so successful and they can put out big games to the most niche thing you ever seen. And the train just keeps on going. So I'm so grateful that we have a company like that today in this gaming world.
Okay, that was the final question, therefore the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share on the off chance you enjoyed it. Ring bells for notifications. But really, we're asking you to game the YouTube algorithm by pressing that button. DF Supporter Program, join us. Gain early access to the Direct each and every week. Early access to some of our content. News updates from the team, lots going on there. And of course, store.digitalfoundry.net if you wish to wear clothing with our logo on it. It really is that simple. And there's some cups and whatnot as well. Good stuff. Okay, that's all from us on this one. We'll see you next week. But in the meantime, thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.